Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is episode number 156. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very special guest. I'm so happy that she decided to join me today to talk about what I think is a pretty important topic for you guys to understand. Her name is Jessica Gonzalez. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Jessica Gonzalez, she, her. Very happy and excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So you are best known in our industry for being the founder of A Better ABK, Activision-Blizzard-King, the Workers' Alliance. This is a pro-union move. We talk about unionization a lot on Sacred Symbols, but we've never had someone come on and I think pitch the mechanics of it, how it would work, what it looks like on the inside and all of that. I come from a union household. I was born and raised in a union household. My father's a New York City firefighter. So I've been very much exposed to the pro-union argument my entire life. And as I've gotten older, I feel like become more populist and have really opened my mind to labor movements more than when I was younger. So I wanted to ask you about all of that. And Jessica, I'll just throw it over to you to begin. Let's frame it with who you are specifically. What is your experience in the industry and all of that? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, definitely. So I have been in the video game industry for 7 years. Started out as a contract QA tester at Activision in their functionality headquarters in El Segundo, California. Moved on to Treyarch and then did some contract work for Blizzard. And then was kind of tired of AAA studios like Meat Grinder churning out talent. So I went to an indie company that got bought by a larger company and then became, one of those. And it's just like a common theme in games. But anyway, yeah. And then finally landed back at Blizzard as a full-time test analyst in 2019 and then left more recently in December just due to like some toxic workplace stuff. But
right. I saw
no
that
continuing.
It was November 30th, right? That you
Correct.
resigned.
December 10th was my last day.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So not too long ago, like a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So with all of that kind of laid foundationally about where you've been and what you've done, and obviously your intimate relationship with Activision Blizzard as an employee and, on more than one occasion, what specifically was the genesis, let's say, of the Better ABK Workers Alliance? Like what was the, I know you said kind of the churn. I totally get that. I co-own a studio too, small, so we don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. We can barely afford everyone that we need. So it's the exact opposite problem. But nonetheless, I'm very curious as to what, if there was like a specific thing. Obviously, you've kind of been more aligned with what's been going on at Raven recently, but I assume that there's much more to it. So can you explain a little bit of that?
Absolutely. So it's funny that you mentioned you kind of grew up in a union household, because so did I. My dad is in the ILWU, so he's a longshoreman. And I just grew up like knowing that everyone around where I lived had good healthcare and they were taken care of by their job and stuff like that. When I first joined Blizzard as a full-time employee in 2019, it was right before the Blitzchung incident. And I just watched leadership horribly handle every aspect of that. Like employees were left in the dark. No one got any updates internally. Internal communications was radio silent. It was just a nightmare. And, employees were protesting. And it's like, and then shortly after that, we also talked about compensation issues where Blizzard, we felt, didn't pay very well. Especially in an expensive area like Irvine, California. People needed like 5 roommates in order to survive out there. And it was just nightmare scenario. And, there wasn't really any help for like people that had kids and things like that. So going into it with, all of that and then kind of being treated like fodder from the industry for so long. And then the news of the DFEH lawsuit broke. And everyone was just pissed because of leadership's response to it was essentially like gaslighting the entire company, saying this stuff doesn't happen here. Meanwhile, the women that spoke to the DFEH were at the company. So it's like, how are you going to say on behalf of every woman that works at Blizzard, like these stories are not true or they're out of context or they're old? So it was kind of just like a mass agitation where employees were already feeling like nobody was heard. And we just watched leadership handle things horribly. And we're like, okay, without a seat at the table, employees, like, this isn't going to be a good company.
So, what kind of support were you receiving kind of during this agitation early on to kind of organize something greater? Because certainly you put
Yeah.
your neck out. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a dangerous move. Like Ravens, and we'll talk about it in a little while. I mean, I would assume technically a wildcat strike if you would even
Mhm.
call it something like that. So these are dangerous moves
They
legally
are.
in the United States. So what kind of support or I guess pushback did you receive internally when this began?
Yeah, the pushback was mostly just, I mean, in the US, for some reason, there's a lot of propaganda against unionization. So it just was a lot of educating people on labor rights. Like, I spent a good majority of, the last 6 months just educating people about unions, about, like, they're telling us we don't need one. We definitely need one. Here's why, here's how leadership has behaved prior. Here's all the stuff that went down under Bobby Kotick's watch. Like, this is just unacceptable, and workers are not going to be treated, within their best interests unless they have a seat at the table. And so I just kept stressing that. And I'm like, everyone, I feel like people get hung up on the fact that it needs to be perfect. And because of that, they don't progress. And I think that, just keep reminding everyone, like, we don't need perfect, we need better. We need better than what we're getting right now. It's not working out for us. Leadership will do the legal minimum versus the ethical maximum.
Hmm.
So if we're out here protected by a strike, like the ABK strike was totally unprotected for Raven. They're not unionized. So that's why I had to, like, work out how to even do a strike fund, because, we're not a union, so we don't have the money for a strike fund. Um, it's been a crazy time, and the pushback internally was just people that were confused and angry, and like, why is this happening? We don't know what's going on. And they saw it as a, like, us versus leadership, but we used all avenues that we could to try to communicate with leadership, and they'll, like, tell us that they communicated with us, but they never do. So it's really weird that we're being gaslit from management, and then it's just hard. It almost feels like a cult or like brainwashing, like, oh, you work in the video games industry, you should be thankful and
Right.
not complain about where you work and things like that. So it was just a lot of education and calming people's nerves, because it's scary. Like, the first walkout we had, everyone was afraid. They didn't want to get their picture taken. They didn't want to talk to press because they didn't know their rights. But then I started, like, myself and a few other organizers started educating them on their rights. You're legally protected. Here's what you're allowed to do. Then they started being more like, oh yeah, take our picture, and, more vocal about it. I just went into it like, I'm tired of the industry, so I'm going to be as loud as possible, because I'm tired. And I guess it, like, sparked people to join in and kind of help with that movement, push it forward.
So I want to talk more mechanically about what you think the solution would be. Like if you were given the opportunity and they said, Jessica, let's go with what you think is reasonable within the parameters of the money we make and the structure of our company. Whatever's reasonable and unreasonable, I guess, would be subjective. But
Right.
what would you want for them from out of Activision Blizzard? Or so let's say, I know Ubisoft has kind of a sister, obviously a big problem going on, and you have a sister organization there working with them as well. I don't know if,
Hmm.
are you involved with that one too? Because I saw a Better Ubisoft. Is that also you? It,
That's not me, but
okay.
I communicate with the organizers there. So
Okay, cool.
it's like one big community.
Okay, right on. So yeah, like talk to me, like walk me through what you think the solution would be. Like what would solve the problem, like the utopian
Yeah.
vision of it.
I think, I mean, to solve the meat grinder issue, just having kind of like how the films industry unionized, just having, like, talent in their different disciplines, and um removing crunch, or, like, if crunch is needed, having protection in place for crunch, because, a lot of people suffer physically and mentally during crunch. So just better protection around people that do crunch, better um health insurance for people, because, like, even, hand massages or something, so people aren't getting carpal tunnel. Like, you're sitting at a computer all day, or you're, there's so many things that could be protected with the union. And the meat grinder part, it's like, once you finish with the project, you ship the title, you don't need as many people. Okay, they go back into the pool and they can go to another studio, something that
Hmm.
it works interchangeably, but not in a way that's like demeaning where they just bring 30 people in a room and say, hey, we're cutting your contract. Bye. Sorry, you relocated. That's basically what happened to Raven. So just having those protections would be really helpful. And yeah,
Yeah, I
I
was
mean,
going to ask.
I'm not an expert, but
Oh no,
I
I
just,
totally understand. It's so funny because I had written in my notes here. I was going to ask you how you wanted to break it down, and you immediately answered because you said by discipline, which is
yeah,
kind of how I would see it as well. I don't think you could do it by company per se. I do
yeah,
see the movie and TV industries as kind of maybe the way it would be done. Have you thought about um, the international ramifications? Like how would that work? That's always been a major question to me, and something that even
yeah,
Hollywood has a really difficult time circumnavigating. Gaming obviously is so, I would argue, even more global than Hollywood. So
right,
would that be a problem considering Ubisoft, for instance, owns studios all over the world, or Activision,
right.
not so much Activision, but they own studios all over the world too. So what would be the solution to that, do you think?
I wish I knew the solution to the international. There were a lot of employees that wanted to support us, and we're like, we're not in the US. How do we help? And they were actually fascinated at some of the conversations that we were having because, I guess out there, unions aren't as taboo. So they're just like, oh, it's so fascinating to read like conversations between US employees. It's just almost as if we're wired to think without our best interests in mind.
I think you're right too. I had read a Pew Research poll. The poll indicates what we know, which is that union membership is at an all-time low in the U.S., less than
Yeah,
10% now, I think. But and they say here, quote, in the survey, 56% say the large reduction in unionization over the past several decades in the percentage of workers who are represented has been somewhat or very bad for the country.
yeah,
60% say this has been bad for working people. Um, One thing I wanted to ask you about though is that bottom. I started working at IGN as a grunt. I worked for GameFAQs. I would do anything. I would do anything. And I know I like and it worked for me, but it doesn't work for a lot of people. I understand that. How do you deal, since you're dealing with the very bottom, where the bottom of a company in terms of, I don't want to say skill set, but in terms of how you enter QA and things of that nature, intersects directly or like buttresses against like the workforce itself. In other words, this is the bottom rung for a lot of people to get in. How do you convince people that want to get in that they don't want to kind of work in this vacuum that's being created by people, for instance, doing a wildcat strike? Because I noticed on Twitter you called them scabs, which is fine, but I find that somewhat unfair because it's not organized. So they're not
Mhm.
really doing anything wrong, right? Am
Yeah,
I?
no. And it's funny that you mentioned that tweet because a lot of the QA that were working on Raven's software's um, project were actually retweeting it because they thought it was funny. So I think it's just a general term. I really just like to spread awareness that we are striking. I know there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion out there. So the reason I used the term scabs was because, Activision was pooling people from other projects to put on this project where workers were striking. And, while they weren't hired to replace the worker, it's still kind of like we don't want to open a dialogue with our Raven employees, so we're going to use employees from Texas and Minnesota.
Yeah, it's sadistic. I mean, it happens at the international level, especially too with working people. That it
Hmm.
bothers me where they're just shuffled around,
Right.
mistreated, disrespected. So I totally understand that aspect of it. Um, are I know actually I was just I brought up this story because I did want to bring this up. I know games industry just wrote about how there seems to be some confusion between Raven, Activision, I guess your organization, some workers, about what's being communicated, if anything's even trying to be moved forward in terms of solving this problem at Raven and elsewhere. Uh, do you think that maybe, and because I'm trying to find actionable solutions here, do you think that maybe a board membership for someone that represents only the workers would be the best solution to give someone a vote at that table?
I mean, it would be great somebody who advocates directly for the workers
Right.
because it's like you're leading a creative like environment. You're leading, you know, people need to be happy in order to create good products, especially in the creative like video game industry. So I just think that without that seat at the table, it's not going to happen. And, the products are going to suffer because what are they doing? They're pulling more people from other projects onto this project instead. So all of the projects collectively are suffering now instead of solving the problem, opening the dialogue. And, it's almost like they're banking on people getting tired and leaving or something.
Yeah, you kind of wait people out, and that's obviously uh, a decades old, more than that probably, union busting technique.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess my next question is, how political is this? Obviously, unionization is inherently political. It
Mm-hmm.
used to be kind of left wing, and now it's like working class. It's hard for me to even really figure all of that out at this point. I don't think anything makes sense anymore. But is this a political movement as well? I hate the term intersectionality just because I think it's used too much. But the intersection of the systemic social problems, sexism, misogyny, all of those kinds of things that I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you guys speak out about, but also the workers' rights aspect and all of that, healthcare you had brought up. Is it
Mm-hmm.
inherently a political movement at the end of the day? I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying, is that kind of the
Yeah.
heart and soul of it?
I would say it's political. So the reason why that's a weird term for me is because when I first started speaking up about like diversity, inclusion, racism in the workplace, unconscious bias, things like that, people are like, "Oh, that's political." I'm like, "How is that political if it's, human rights, like LGBT community deserve rights and they deserve to exist without being harassed and made an example out of or made a joke out of at work." And it's just like the way the system works now is it's a stack ranking system where they tell managers pick the best person on your team and pick the worst person on your team, and they'll pick their friend as the best, and then they don't like gay people, so they'll pick the gay person as a bad worker. And so they'll say they don't discriminate, but it's like those microaggressions are everywhere in the industry. And the nepotism Olympics is everywhere in the industry. It's like whoever you're friends with is going to get a promotion, a raise,
Definitely.
etc. And the way that the stack ranking system is set up, it's just designed for marginalized people to fail. It
Mm.
just feels like it's a ceiling, and that's where I think it's like they're not directly political because it shouldn't be political to want to live your life and be happy and not suffer. But yeah, I would say it's political with a little asterisk.
Yeah, fair enough. I think um, one of the things I wanted to explore with you that's kind of a sister to that question in some way is the answer to this problem, because you're focusing obviously on ABK, which is fine, big,
Mm-hmm.
huge, massive global entity. But is the solution to the problem, even though you suggest kind of an interdisciplinary approach to it, is the solution going to be different for different teams? For instance, should a studio that is independent and is just putting the money into the next game and so on and so forth, should they be subjected to some sort of unionization as well? Or is this something that should only be catered first towards the megacorps?
So I think the larger the studio, just it's rougher and the labor practices are kind of bad. And if you're in an indie company and they treat you well and you get good healthcare and you're not doing crunch, like fine, you don't really need a union if you're being treated fairly in the workplace. But if there's this huge corporation that's like pulling all of your game ideas or like only acquiring studios to put them on one project and just being real working against every interest of the creative director or whatever, what have you. I think the bigger corporations need to unionize because there's like this level of disconnect there from the executive and the board level from the workers, and it's almost like they live in an alternate reality.
I agree in just seeming that the bean counters that these companies have, and I mean, I guess it makes sense. Their fiduciary obligation is to make money, but it seems like they have an outsized role. I can say that working at IGN, that was certainly true. And even though it was a media side, you'll probably appreciate that we tried to tackle the inequity in pay at
Mm-hmm.
IGN at the time. We used to have bonus structures where we would give each other our bonuses. Basically, here's $5,000, give it to whoever you think, like, and split it up as much as you want. And who would win? Well, the people that were popular would win. And
Right.
we didn't like that. So we tried to do that. And what did they do? They came in and said, you better cut that shit out. and yelled at us for it. So I feel what you're saying there. My fear about this cross-discipline industry-wide thing is that it's going to create a vacuum wherein the A space can't afford to do business anymore. Certainly the indie
Mm.
space can't afford it. And then all you get is fucking Call of Duty, fart noise, whatever the hell they're going to do next. And so is there any consideration for the unintended consequences of unionization that could deleteriously affect a studio? Like if we at Lilymo, my studio, not that I don't know that why we would even deal with union. We're so small, but if we did, it would probably screw us. I mean, we probably just wouldn't be able to afford to do anything. But at the same time, we make sure to pay people so equitably, and especially at Last Stand as well, that no one would want to unionize. I wouldn't even see why they would want to. So maybe it's a little bit of both.
Right. It's a little bit of both, where you shouldn't need a union, but if your employer is telling you you don't need a union, you probably do. I think it's super funny that Brian sent that email on my last day, December 10th, and was like, please consider the consequences of signing this
Mm.
card. And he says, if you sign this card, it takes our ability to negotiate with you directly away. And it's like, well, what negotiation? You kind of just do things without, there's like no democracy. So I think, if you're a small indie company, if you're listening to your employees, if there's a democracy, if it's not just like one person telling everyone else what to do, perfect. You don't need a union. Um, but in these instances, Activision notoriously just treats people like crap.
I've heard I've
And
heard I've heard both things. I've heard some people that enjoy. It seems that the higher the person is on the totem pole, maybe naturally, the happier they are at a place, and so you hear a lot of rumblings lower on the lower ends of the rungs, which makes sense, which is what you're trying to protect, and I totally get that. I think the more gratuitous thing to me, and what really opened my eyes to this, and why I wanted to have you on the show as well, is just how much money Activision makes.
right.
I'm a naturally conservative person, I think, but I do think that a system that allows people to accrue billions and billions and billions of dollars, there's something I guess that could happen. I guess there's a natural way the market can manufacture that, but I don't think so. Like it just seems like it has to happen at the behest of someone else. And
Yeah.
that's really opened my eyes a great deal, to be honest.
Yeah, there's definitely no ethical way to put it. There is a lot, like Bobby Kotick gave himself a $200 million bonus in 2019 and then laid off hundreds of workers for no reason. He can afford to keep them,
Yeah, $200
you
million
know?
dollars is the cost of a 5 years of a AAA project. I mean, that you can
Hmm.
support a whole team for that. Now, I'm not saying, see, this is where the rubber hits the road for me, because I'm not saying that Bobby Kotick doesn't have the right to make all of his money.
Right.
This. I mean, he saved Activision. Activision was done before when he came in and bought it, or bought a piece of it. And so I'm sure he has some sort of like intractable association with this brand that he can't imagine not happening. But I wonder, do you think that it could be fixed with him still there, or must he go?
I think he has to go. I think the system that he put in place failed his workers, failed the women working for him. I think that he has failed in leadership and, responding to these issues, and just really like employees have no faith in Kotick. The board can say whatever they want, but zero faith. The fact that he hid behind Francis Townsend to send an email on behalf of all of the women at Activision-Blizzard-King and then revealed it was him, and then sent an email calling his original email tone deaf, and still like saying it was Francis. So throwing a woman under the bus. It's just like, you can't make this up. You can't make up this like mustache twirl level of weird shit going on at a company. It's just so blatant. And you have a bunch of tech savvy people. You're telling them we pay fairly, but you're not showing anyone data. You're just saying, trust me, bro, that's the source. And employees are sick of it.
Why hasn't the board moved, do you think, more to, because they're the only, well, the shareholders obviously can do it themselves. They're not going to. So why hasn't the board moved more aggressively, do you think? What is it that Bobby has some sort of gravitas? Obviously, they're afraid of him. Or is
Mm-hmm.
it that they believe he's the man for the job? Because there's no denying, if you are a bean counter, that Bobby's your man. So I do wonder where what the conflict is here, because I was surprised that there wasn't even like someone on the board that felt brave enough. There are people that
Hmm.
substantial people. By the way, Bobby also sits on other boards, and that
Right.
hasn't on Coca-Cola and other boards. So what's going on here? Why do you think there's not more movement, do you say?
I think they're paid handsomely. I think that they just are paid. Showing how Bobby wrote Frances's letter and she was fine to just stamp her name on it. They have a lot of trust that Bobby's going to do whatever it takes for the bottom line, and that's it. So I think the confidence that they have in Kotick is the confidence to continue churning out this insane profit while being a huge corporation and turning out games every year. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems there's something to that because it's like it's a conflict of interest, no doubt,
Hmm.
like investigating your own potential crimes or a complicit, like
Right.
one of your cohorts. Yeah. Do you feel like maybe, and I wonder, this would be such a heavy lift to frame it for people that are into finance. You'll know that Ubisoft almost got hostily taken over on the market by Vivendi over many years. They would just go and buy shares and just gobble up the company, trying to get more and more of it. Do
Hmm.
you think that there's a move to make with the shareholders to kind of plead directly to them? There's some massive shareholders of Activision um, that probably could affect change if they not got 50% plus one, but even got 10 or 15 or 20% of them to vote a certain way. Have you
Yeah.
considered that option?
Yeah, definitely. It's just hard to reach the shareholders. Employees and formers even are listening to these earnings calls, where they at first were just calling us human capital. And then after we were like, hey, that's probably an offensive term to refer to your employees. And then they finally stopped. So that's cool. But yeah, we would listen to these earnings calls, and the shareholders from those calls, I'm assuming, are pre-screened. So they just ask about, like, are the delays going to affect this or that? And, not that we had one or two people maybe talking about, the workers and how everything needs to be managed there, and then they just get the, oh yes, we're working on it. And Jen O'Neill was the only person that referred to us as people and like said that she had confidence in us, and she's now gone. So it's like weird.
Makes the sense to me. She has a production background, so I would feel that she would be most human oriented in some way,
Yeah, yeah,
as opposed to being like a creative, you know.
she's definitely wonderful. But yeah, just wish that we could, I guess, reach the shareholders, or I think there might be a lawsuit of a group of shareholders, but I don't know that they hold enough of the shares to, kind of get that kind of publicity for it, or, make an actual statement. It would be nice to have them kind of see like, hey, this is going to tank unless, the employees are taken care of. Um, that would be awesome. But yeah, I feel like it would definitely help for sure.
When you left, did you feel some sort of obligation to, or were you struggling with some sort of obligation to stay to solicit Activision on their behalf and try to advocate on their behalf on employees' behalf, or stay in the industry? Because I know you went to finance, which is a
Hmm.
great place to be. I mean, who wouldn't want to be there? But do you feel like you had to get away, or do you feel like that was a mistake that may have hurt your ability to communicate, or is it kind of a neutral thing for you as far as your ability to work in this in for the unionization push?
Yeah, so I don't think it hurt any type of organizing. It actually helped. I wasn't as stressed out because
Yeah.
it's like I'm not worried about retaliation. I'm not worried about, which I got a lot of retaliation. Just people trying to make examples out of me, picking fights, and calling guys that were defending me white knights in work chats, getting bounced out. It was like a speed run for misogyny, essentially. And it was just like so taxing on my mental health that I was like, I need to wake up and be excited to go to work and not dread reading what people are saying about me today. So it helped remove me from the toxicity part of the workplace. And that way I was able to kind of focus on just the organizing part and making sure that the people that are still there are supported, and getting people into, conversations with legal or with CWA or whoever they needed to talk to. It was so much easier after leaving Activision Blizzard.
Yeah, because it's almost in my mind, it almost should be that way. Like it should be a
Hmm.
separate entity that
Yeah.
is organizing this thing so that the Venn diagram kind of overlaps with the
Hmm.
worker itself. I asked you about politics before, and I'm intrigued to ask you this following question, which is, do you see a growing ally in the forming populist right that also hates corporations and the rich? I feel like I'm not saying you, but the royal you, when everything shakes out and becomes silent, you realize, in my opinion, that there's a great deal of overlap right now between, I hate to use this term, but what you might even call MAGA
Mm,
conservatives, Trumpist conservatives, populist conservatives, and the advocate and activist left, that the enemies are exactly the same. You see things online sometimes where it's like tax the rich, and it's like, yeah, okay, yeah. Or like, break up the big corporations or break up the banks, and it's like, yeah, 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 okay. So are you paying attention to that? Because I feel like that alliance might be uncomfortable for some people, but I think when you realize that they're not what you think they are, a lot of these people, I think you might find some powerful allies to help you in your cause. Have you looked into that or considered that?
yeah, I actually have, funny enough. When I started advocating in the workplace, I mean, we get people, we're a huge company, we get people from all walks of life, right? Except the people that are just hell bent on being assholes. A lot of them are actually really cool people to talk to and have legitimate concerns. And the thing I love about unions is it doesn't matter where you lean, you're unifying as the worker. Like we're all workers, so we're an alliance of workers, and that's what we're going to be at the end of the day, and we're going to advocate for each other. And it's great. I think hopefully there could be a better dialogue between the two, because I know it can get kind of messy. I don't like to delve into those kind of conversations because it just drains me. But as long as you're not an asshole, like fine with me. So,
Yeah, I feel the same way going in the other direction. Like, I feel like it's gotten so crazy that people have lost sight of the forest for the trees. Like, totally been like, oh yeah, we want the same thing, and I think that everyone wants the same thing. You want a happy life, a family that you can take care of, money in the bank, a roof over your head. This is shit obviously everyone can get behind. I want to ask you, as we begin to wrap up, what are there any companies that are doing it right? Um, I think of worker-owned companies like Motion Twin and others, but it doesn't. They're one-offs in a sea of many a studio that's run in different ways and different verticals and all of the rest. Is there any entity, large or small, that you would think would be worth replicating to make a more positive impact for other companies to follow?
that's a great question that I wish I knew a definitive answer to, because it's weird. You want to think of a company of like, we're doing it perfect, we're doing it the best. But right now, where Activision Blizzard is, it's like the bar's on the floor or even in a hole in the ground. So you have to even get to the floor. We need better right now. And looking to people that, companies that open up dialogue with between employees and leaders is like huge, and not just listening sessions that are mostly appeasement sessions, like actually listening with actions is just super important. And, a democratic process, I guess, in the workplace would be great too. It's just this disconnect where, like, if you're in games, you just do what you're told to do, despite, like quality assurance, for example, they're the player advocate. If a title is doing terribly, it's because they treated their quality assurance department like garbage. Um, so it's just, I wish I knew. I wish I knew a company that was doing it 100% perfect, exactly how we would want it. And this is the perfect time to actually, I guess, grind that out and have those conversations. And, what does the perfect AAA studio look like for you? And how can we get there on a democratic process?
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's such a complicated problem to think about.
Yeah,
I've been
it
writing
is.
writing things down because there's so many different nuances to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like I feel like the international thing is going to be the most difficult. See, when I feel like when I look at, I was watching the Game Awards, and we kept seeing this logo for Level Infinite, which is just a brand under Tencent, the Chinese company,
Yeah.
and I see this kind of intrusion from other parts of the world, and my hope is that with different sets of rules and mores for their workers, and of course China is horrible with that. So I look at it and say, I hope that maybe the American companies or the Western companies can say, like, let's treat our workers well enough where people wouldn't even want to work for those kinds of companies. And with my own organizations, like I said, I guess if people wanted to unionize, they could do whatever they wanted, but it's my hope that people are treated well enough that they wouldn't even think to. And maybe the studios that are doing it the best are those studios. There are people who are like, no, we're good. And they're, to be fair, because I'm always shit talking all these places too. There's a lot of places that are doing it right, in ways big and small. But I'll be really intrigued to follow this and see more, especially with Ubisoft, like kind of your partnership with and your communication with them. And it would be interesting to see EA, and if Take-Two and some of the other behemoths got in, then you might really get the ball rolling. And as a creative myself, I've kind of gone up and down this roller coaster of unions. I never really had a problem with private unions, so I can't pretend that I did, but I had a real fucking, annoyance with public sector unions. Maybe it was me being mad at my dad. But at the end of the day, I feel like there's nothing to lose by treating your workers well. And there's nothing to lose by giving them, I think, some sort of equitable seat at the table. And that's why I asked you about the money situation and all that, because, and billionaires as opposed to millionaires, I have no problem with Bobby Kotick or Kotick making $10 million a year. It's like, whatever, man. Like, being a CEO is hard. It's hard. It's executive level work, decisions that affect thousands, but that's what you're saying, is that the decisions affect thousands. And so maybe there should be a little more equity there. And I just couldn't imagine being in a position where I felt like I earned that much money, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like where I would
definitely
look at it,
agree with that.
Yeah. Where I look at it, I'm like, yeah, I made $150 million worth of value. Sure.
Ethically?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it just seems not possible. And that's
right.
And that, I think, is the growing populism in me, even though I'm coming from more of a right-wing perspective, where I'm like, this just something not right about this. That's why I think there's a lot of natural allies to be had, and why I'm glad that we had this conversation. So I hope this will introduce our audience to this, because we've had the perspective. We had a legal analyst on to talk about the legal perspectives. So I want to make sure they got this perspective as well. But you're very welcome to come back on if you have more to say in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Where can people find you, Jessica, if they want to follow you on Twitter or elsewhere?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I am @_TechJess. And I also have @A Better ABK. So yeah, feel free to follow those Twitters. And yeah, I'm on there a lot. So
yeah, you'll find her, I guess, if you want to talk to her. Well, Jessica, it was nice to meet you in person, so to speak. And thank you for being here. And thank you all out there for your continued love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand and Sacred Symbols. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.